True Christian growth is not possible without a change of mind. That's what we're doing when we're looking at and embracing the perspective of Christ. We're looking at really the essence of Christian growth. If you don't change your perspective to have the perspective of Christ, then you're not going to grow. You're going to continue to be who you are naturally in the flesh, in this world, as a person. Now, I realize our physical brains and the complex function of our brains are inescapable. That's a disappointing truth for many of us. We wish we didn't think the way we think. We wish we didn't have the minds that we have. We wish we didn't approach life the way we do. But we're given a brain at birth. In fact, we're given a brain before that is formed in many ways during our childhood. But we are who we are. Our brains are what they are. Our minds are what they are in the flesh, in this world, in our bodies, our biological makeup. And as much as we might wish at times in our lives to do this, we just can't get a new brain. They don't have brain transplants yet. We can't go to a machine and find one and say, I'm going to switch this out for a different brain. We have to live with the minds we're given in our bodies. We're stuck with those things. It's good for some of us, but for most of us, it's not so good. Now, understand that the Bible does not address mental health as much as it addresses spiritual health. And it's a complex area to really navigate through, especially in a day and age in which we're becoming more aware of mental health problems, mental health issues. It's an area now that we're starting to understand the complexities of the human mind, but it's also an area right now in our society which we're shoving all the spiritual aside and making every problem about mental health. Have you noticed that? Now, if you're a criminal, you're not a bad person, you're a mentally ill person. And that's not to discredit the veracity that there are mental illnesses that contribute to our moral problems. I don't want you to interpret that statement any other way. But now when we have mass shootings, people immediately say there's something mentally wrong with them. And there may be, but we have to accept the fact that there's something very spiritual wrong with them. All right? You can have a mental problem and you look at colors differently or numbers differently, but that doesn't automatically make you do terrible things to people. It's a spiritual problem. So let's make sure we understand that the spiritual conversation must be a part of even the mental conversation. And that's why I say the Bible does not address mental health as much as it addresses spiritual health. The Bible will tell us that the condition of the spirit is what ultimately impacts the condition of the mind. And while we can't change the brain, we can change the spirit, which will then impact the mind. Perspective and how we think is not solely at the mercy of the brain. Perspective and how we think has much to do with the condition of the spirit as anything else. And again, please don't accuse me of simplifying a very difficult issue when it comes to mental illness. I'm not doing that at all. In fact, it's the most difficult area of my ministry to deal with, that line between spirit and mental. However, we don't want to ignore the fact that the Bible definitely addresses the relationship between spirit and mind. That's why we're in 1 Corinthians 2. Let's read some verses together. I'll make a number of comments, so don't be surprised if we're jumping in and out of it. Verse number 9, the Bible says this, "But as it is written, eye hath not seen, nor ear heard, neither have entered into the heart of man the things which God hath prepared for them that love him." So what Paul is saying is, listen, there's no video, there's no photo, there's no audio, there's not a library where you can go to and learn about what God has prepared for us. There's no place in this world you can go and plug your USB port into it and find out, oh, that's what's in the future for me, or oh, that's what heaven looks like, or oh, this is what God is thinking about doing for me. That's not possible. Verse number 10, "But, even though that library doesn't exist, God hath revealed them unto us by his Spirit. For the Spirit searcheth all things, yea, the deep things of God." And in verse 11, he's going to use an illustration. He starts by asking the question, "For what man knoweth the things of a man, save the spirit of man which is in him?" He's saying, essentially, how do you know what I'm thinking? How do you know what I'm feeling? How do you know what my dreams are? How do you know what my aspirations are? How do you know what my fears are? How do you know the things of this man unless you have the spirit of this man? In fact, the only way you can learn about how I feel or how I think or what I don't like or do like is you have to get me to talk. And even then, you can't be sure to understand it because I have a hard time maybe explaining how I think. No one knows my mind and my soul, my feelings like me. And if you want to know me, you have to get into my spirit somehow. There's no machine that you can plug into me and get all my information. It just doesn't exist. The closest we get today is maybe a lie detector machine. That's the closest we'll get to understanding what someone thinks. You can get an MRI done and they can look at areas of your brain and identify maybe where there's activity, but no way can anyone know what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, unless you have my personality, my spirit, my soul, which is impossible. That's why Paul says. He says here in verse 11, what man knoweth the things of a man, save the spirit of man which is in him? He goes on to then say, even so, the things of God knoweth no man, but the Spirit of God. No one can know God's feelings. No one can know God's opinions. No one can know God's intentions unless they have the Spirit of God. Because the Spirit of God in someone else is essentially the personality of God, the mind of God in someone else. I can't give you my spirit. I can't reach into my soul and pull out some of my spirit and throw it in you so you can understand me. But God can do that with himself. He can take some of his spirit, put it in you. Now you know the things that God's prepared for you. Now you know the things of God. This is the beauty of the Spirit. It allows for us to know something we have no business knowing. Verse 12. Now we have received, not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit which is of God, that we might know the things that are freely given to us of God. I want you to see, don't focus so much on the intentions of God for us, but I want you to see what precedes the knowledge of God. It's the Spirit of God. God gives us his Spirit. Those of us who put our faith in Christ, we're born again. He makes us a child of God. We're adopted of him. And he puts inside of us the Spirit of God. We become the temple of God. And when we have the Spirit of God, we now can know the things of God. So what impacts the mind? What impacts knowledge? What impacts thinking? The Spirit. The Spirit of God allows us to know the things of God. Spirit connected to the knowledge of God. This is why many intellectual people can't understand God. They sit down in a group of people and they begin to philosophize, they begin to put their minds together, and they just can't relate to the God of the Bible, and they try to use reasoning, their own logic, and to them it makes no sense. Why? Because they don't have the Spirit of God. Look at it in verse number 14. But the natural man, that man who is unsaved, that man who does not have the Holy Spirit, that man who is only with his human mind, only with his human DNA, the natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness unto him, neither can he know them. Because they, the things of God, are spiritually discerned. If you're going to understand God, discern the things of God, you have to have the Spirit of God to open your eyes to the things of God. Your human mind, you can only grasp a little of God. You can read about him and try to make sense of it, but it isn't until you get his Spirit that allows you to say, oh, that's how God thinks. Oh, that's what God is doing. Oh, that is why God is the way he is. Verse 15, but he that is spiritual, someone who has received the Spirit, they're not dead in their sins, but they're alive, they're quickened by the Spirit, they're now spiritual, judgeth all things, yet he himself is judged of no man. For who hath known the mind of the Lord, that he may instruct him? Paul is pulling a passage out of the Old Testament. In the book of Isaiah, God essentially says, hey, who knows me? Who thinks like I think? Who has my mind? Who has enough knowledge? Who has enough understanding? Who's eternal? Who's infinite? Who would dare counsel me? Who would dare sit down with me and instruct me? Who would say to me, they know better? Who has the mind of God that you can be my counselor? That's an Old Testament passage. Paul is referring to that, saying, yeah, who has the mind of God? Who can think like God? Who knows the things of God? Verse 16. We can. We do. Paul says, but we, believers, Christians, those who have the Spirit of God, but we have the mind of Christ. Paul is saying, listen, do you know how incredible this is? The natural man can't discern God. They can't understand God. But the spiritual man, those of us who have been born again, those of us who have the Spirit of God, we now can think like God. We now can understand God. We can connect with God. We can relate to God. We can discuss with God. We can pray with God. We have the mind of Christ.
Amen.
It's amazing. Why are we allowed to think differently than the natural man? Is it because we go to church every week? Is it because we've spent so much time in reading books about God, or reading the Bible? No, we can relate to God. We can have a different mindset, a different perspective, not because we're mentally any stronger, but because we're spiritually alive and we have the Holy Spirit, which then allows us
Amen.
to get more of the mind of Christ. That's what he's talking about here. That's what's so beautiful. You see, perspective is about more than the brain. Our mental health is about more than the brain within our heads. Our mentality has everything to do with our spirituality. Our mentality, our mindset, our perspective, our thought process, our mentality has everything to do with our spirituality. This is why we can pursue a different brain or a different mind with the same brain. And this is a good statement that I suggest you write down somewhere and remember it, but Christian growth is the process of allowing the spiritual to impact the cerebral. The whole point of growing in our faith is so that our growth will be a change to the mind. It's the spiritual, as it's flourished, as it's fed, as it's given attention, impacts the cerebral. Someone who gets saved, their thinking still a lot like the natural man, but if they grow, if they continue to feed the Spirit and give the Lord the time necessary to grow him, eventually they have a whole different mindset. Why? Did their brains change over the course of their growth? No. Still the same brain, still forgetful, still flawed, but they're thinking differently with the same brain. Why? Because the Spirit is controlling the thought process. Isn't that beautiful? You say, I got a problem with my mind. Welcome to the club. How do I fix that? Without me stepping on any medical toes, because I'm not a doctor, I'm a pastor, but how do I fix bad thoughts? How do I fix struggling mindsets? Well, let me tell you a free way to do it, a way that has no side effects. Impact the spiritual. Because that will definitely have a positive impact on the cerebral. Well, you don't know, Pastor, I'm this, I have this condition, that condition. Leave that to the doctors. You know what will never hurt that? Is growing your faith. You may, like a friend of mine, need a little bit of medication, but you're going to need a lot of Jesus. Do not assume that your problems can be solved only by doctors. The Lord will certainly help us with this. Turn to Ephesians chapter 4. I want to show you just one more phrase before we get into the Gospels. Of all the things I'm looking forward to heaven to clarify, it is the fine line between body, soul, and spirit. Because there are clearly, in this church, I'm aware of many of you are struggling with depression. A lot of you are struggling with anxiety. Some of you have addictive issues. Some of you have disorders that you're looking into with both medicine, therapy, and combination of counseling. And again, I'm not discouraging anyone from pursuing medical advice. Please do that. Don't take anything for granted. Don't approach it lightly. But I can tell you this much. Whatever you do there, you should do that much more here when it comes to the Scriptures. Because God and His Word will never steer you wrong. It will only help you. It will only facilitate whatever other therapy or medication you're looking into. Ephesians chapter 4, look at verse 14. The context is growth. Paul says that we henceforth be no more children. Verse 15, speaking the truth in love may grow up into Christ in all things. That's what we're talking about. Verse 17, Paul writes, this I say therefore, and testify in the Lord, that ye henceforth walk not as other Gentiles walk, in the vanity of their mind. That's the average man, the natural man. Verse 20, he says, you haven't learned Christ. You're not growing because you haven't learned about Christ. That's what we're talking about in our study. 2 Peter 3:18, but grow in grace and in the knowledge of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Verse 22. Paul says, put off concerning the former conversation the old man, which is corrupt. And then in verse 23, he says a phrase that we have to appreciate. He says, be renewed in the spirit of your mind. Whoa, I thought it's all about mental. I thought it's all about cerebral. No. Paul says if you want to change your life, if you want to stop being the old man, you want to be the new man, you have to renew your mind, but you have to renew it not with a book, not with a sit down and meditate and become different. It's renewing in the spirit of your mind. Meaning your spiritual impacts your mental. Your spiritual health impacts your mental health. Your spiritual mindset impacts your mental mindset. Be renewed. This is a daily thing. We can't change brains, but we can renew our mindset, our perspective, our mentality by addressing our spirituality. Again, I say Christian growth is the process of allowing the spiritual to impact the cerebral. Paul says in Romans 12:1, be transformed, like changed entirely, transformed by the renewing of your mind. It all starts here, but it actually starts here. The spirit impacts the mind, and the mind controls the actions. So how do I fix the actions? Well, address the mind. I'm trying, but it's driving me crazy. You haven't gone deeper down into the soul. The heart of the soul, the cockpit of the soul is the heart, the spirit, which then drives the mind, which then makes decisions. That's the whole point about changing our perspective. All right, you've done a good job. Luke chapter 9. Head over to Luke chapter 9. Let's get right into it. We talked 2 weeks ago. Number 1, for Jesus, the Father takes precedent over the family. And we talked about in Luke chapter 2 when he was back in the temple and said to his parents, how is it that you sought me? Didn't you know I was going to be busy about my Father's business? And we had a big disconnect between Jesus and Joseph and Mary. They just didn't understand each other's mindset. Perspective was so drastically different. Jesus said God's more important than family. And Mom and Dad said, well, isn't family important? And they just didn't really figure it out too well. Last week we looked at Mark chapter 8. We saw the invisible in Jesus' mind took precedent over the visible. We looked at those disciples when Jesus said, hey, you guys, watch out for the leaven of the Pharisees and of the rest of the people in society. And they thought, oh, why is he so upset at us for not bringing bread on our boat ride here? And Jesus says, why reason ye among yourselves that it's because you forgot bread? I wasn't thinking about bread. I don't care about carbohydrates. I care about doctrine, about your condition of your soul. And they had a little bit of a disconnect as well there. We talked about it. This week we're going to talk about Luke chapter 9. And it says in verse 46, then there arose a reasoning among them, disciples. Verse 46. Make sure you get there. Then there arose a reasoning among them, which of them should be greatest? Now, we just read this and like, yeah, those disciples. This is equivalent to me calling a ministry leaders meeting today. And at 5 o'clock, we get in a room and we say, all right, we're here to discuss who is the best among us. Dave Kress, we'll let you start. Let us know why you think you're the best minister in the group. Well, you know, Pastor, I do this and I do that. We went bowling yesterday and blah, blah, blah. Thank you, Dave Kress. Jennifer Harmon, you're up next. Tell us why you should be the greatest among us. And we spend time doing this, and we actually build cases. Well, I'm the greatest. Well, I'm the pastor. I'm the greatest, obviously. Pastor Phil is the second greatest. He's the associate pastor. And the deacons, they ought to be next too. Ray would tell us why he should be the greatest. Could you imagine if you found out, like, pray for us people, we're having a meeting today. Who will be the greatest? What is going on? That's these goofy guys. Verse 47, and Jesus, perceiving the thought of their heart, took a child and set him by him, and said unto them, whosoever shall receive this child in my name receiveth me. And whosoever shall receive me receiveth him that sent me. For he that is least among you all, the same shall be great. All right, that's a good lesson. Guys, quiet a little bit. Verse 49. They didn't get the lesson. John answered and said, Master, we saw one casting out devils in thy name. But don't worry, we forbade him. Why? Because he followeth not with us. John, did you just say you saw somebody casting out devils and you made him stop? Well, yeah. He wasn't a part of our group, right? I should have kicked him out. You mean you just stopped somebody helping families get devils out of their kids? You just stopped somebody from getting devils out of somebody's spouse. You thought that was a good idea? Yeah. Okay. Verse 51. And it came to pass when the time... verse 50. I want you to see Jesus' response. He says to him, Forbid him not, dummy. For he that is not against us is for us. We're on the same team. Verse 51. And it came to pass when the time was come that he should be received up, Jesus steadfastly set his face to go to Jerusalem, and sent messengers before his face, and they went and entered into a village of the Samaritans to make ready for him. And they did not receive him, because his face was as though he would go to Jerusalem. And when his disciples, James and John, saw this, they said, Lord, wilt thou that we command fire to come down from heaven and consume them even as Elias did? We'll kill him, Lord. Like, guys, whoa. First, you're sitting in a room trying to figure out who's the greatest. Remember the little child lesson. The greatest is going to be like this. Okay. Then you went and told somebody who was casting out devils in my name, doing a good deed for my honor. You said not to do that. Now you want to kill these guys, literally with fire from heaven, destroy them, consume them, as Elias did because they wouldn't receive me? Verse number 55, Jesus has kind of had it now. He started gentle. Now he's just telling them how he feels. He turns and rebuked them and said, Ye know not what manner of spirit ye are of. For the Son of Man is not come to destroy men's lives, but to save them. Now you talk about drastically different perspectives. The disciples are all about me, myself, and I. Who is the greatest? Jesus is all about attention to the Lord, falling to his knees, serving others, and he's not there to serve himself. The disciples are all about stopping anyone who isn't on the same page with them. Jesus is essentially saying, if they're not against us, they're for us. The disciples are all about killing anyone who isn't nice to them. Jesus is all about ministering and saving, whether they're nice to them or not. So Jesus tries to delicately guide them through their mental struggles. But when he rebuked them, he essentially said, it's not about praise, boys. It's about preaching the gospel. It's not about acceptance from others. It's about salvation to others. It's not about pushing people around. It's about pointing people upward. It's not about dictating people what they should or shouldn't do. It's about directing people to the Lord. Jesus Christ was on an entirely different mindset and perspective and page than his disciples. Number 3, for Jesus, the mission of saving souls took precedent over the omission. When people set him aside or didn't receive him or rejected him or didn't like him. Jesus said in Mark chapter 10, the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister and to give his life a ransom for many. Is there anything perhaps in our study that's more indicative of who we are in light of who God is, in light of who Christ is? We are all about we are all about me. We are all about I. We are all about myself. We wake up in the beginning of the day, and our first thought is us. By the time we go to bed, our last thought is about us. And everything in between, it's about us. Period. Isn't it? That comes natural. That comes instinctive. That's just a part of who we are. When a baby comes out of the womb, you know what a baby thinks about? Nothing but himself. I read a quote this week by, I forget who it was, but it was a church father. And forgive me, I didn't write it down, so this is dangerous. But this church father said something that is so true. This church father said if a baby came out of the womb with the strength to do what it wanted, it would grab its mother by the throat and demand milk. Now, you're just all envisioning that, I realize. But that's what we are. We are self-centered, selfish individuals by nature, by instinct, by DNA, by the blood that's passed on to us down through the line. We are all self-centered when we're overlooked or forgotten or ignored. Who do we think about? What do we think about? Me. We don't think about the mission God has for us. When we're not consulted with, we think about me. We think about us, not the biblical mission. When we're rejected, we think about us. We think about me, not the biblical mission. The mind of man, period, views everything through themselves. The mind of man is selfish. The mind of Christ, the opposite. The antithesis of the mind of man. It's unselfish. Christ's perspective hinged on the salvation of souls. The disciples' perspective hinged on the greatness of themselves. You think about the disciples. They were willing to destroy men at the expense of the gospel. They were willing to call fire down to destroy people at the expense of the gospel. Jesus Christ was willing to give his life for the sake of the gospel. Like polar opposites, blue and pink. East and west, north and south, men and women, up and down, fat and skinny, tall and short, like total opposites. Jesus and his disciples, Jesus and the mind of man. Paul said we have the mind of Christ. Not when we seek revenge. Not when we're willing to say something that will jeopardize a soul's reception of Christ. Not when we're willing to do something that will jeopardize a soul's reception of Christ. Not when we're willing to impede a person's efforts to minister in the name of Christ. Not when we're willing to distract a person's efforts to help people in the name of Christ. We have the mind of Christ, yet do we use it? I have said this before, in fact, even recently in our study of Ecclesiastes, but the Bible says, Jesus said, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaketh. Let someone talk long enough, you'll learn what their motive is. You'll learn what their purpose is for speaking. And eventually, if someone talks long enough, you'll hear them say, well, I was thinking, or I was hoping, or I would like. You have just revealed the whole purpose for which you're speaking. It's for yourself. If your statement is about what you want, then you have the mind of man. But if your statement is about what God wants, then you may be having the mind of Christ. What do you think about more often and more easily? The Great Commission to preach the gospel, or the Great Omission, where you haven't been consulted or wanted or needed? What do you think about more often and more easily? The cross of Calvary, or the cross that God has asked you to bear? See, the mind of Christ leads to progress. It leads to the salvation of souls. The mind of man leads to conflict. You look at the disciples, they started by discussing who was greatest. They went on to forbidding people doing good things. Then they finally wanted to destroy people's lives. The mind of man leads to destruction. It leads to conflict. Why? Because of pride. Because of pride. I want you to think about how you feel instantly when you find out someone omitted you. You weren't invited to the birthday party. You weren't invited to the social get-together. You weren't consulted about the family gift. What do you feel first and foremost? Yeah, it's called pride. It pulses. It flexes. Oh, why didn't they ask me? What's wrong with me? What's going on with our relationship? Why don't they like me? Why don't they want me? Why don't they need me? It's all about us. When someone rejects you, what is your first instinct? I mean, your initial instinct, if you had no control, what would you do? Right? Our first instinct is, how dare you? That's the mind of man. What do children do when they're in the nursery? Like, if you want to know what you're like, just more sophisticated, more experienced, go down to the nursery. Take a toy. They don't say, you can have it. No, it's like... That's what little kids do. And then next you know, they're both grabbing onto it. Ah! And the, well, share. We don't share at this age. And they're trying to pull it apart. That's the human mind. I mean, look at the nations. We can't get along. Can we? Because we're selfish. Every nation in this world would suck the world dry of its resources if it could, with not a care for any other nation. That's us. Amen. The mind of Christ is willing to look past omissions for the sake of the mission. The mind of Christ is willing to look past differences for the sake of the kingdom. The mind of Christ is determined to not let small matters derail the train from the overall mission. You know what our homes need? For us to declare mission accomplished, Our homes need men and women, husbands and wives, fathers and mothers to be minded with the mind of Christ so that they can focus on what's important. We make a mountain out of the smallest little molehill. Why? Because of me, myself, and I. You think Christ wants us to focus on the problems we focus on? I think not. Our community needs us to have the mind of Christ. Our co-workers, our fellow saints, our church, our children, they need us to have the mind of Christ, because that will allow us to put self aside and make sacrifice the goal. Turn over to Mark chapter 15. I want to give you one more thing quickly here. I hope that makes sense to you. I hope you see the contrast, if nothing else, between who we are by our first birth and who we are by our second birth, who we are by our parents and who we are by our Heavenly Father. And the choice is up to us. You say, how do I choose the mind of Christ? We already talked about it. You feed the Spirit. You give heed to the Spirit within you. You listen to the Spirit. You give attention to the Spirit, and He will change your mind. But most of the time we hear Him and we say, quiet. Right? We get involved with some issue and somebody doesn't like us, or someone ignores us, or someone omits us, or someone says something to us, and we hear the Spirit of God saying, get over yourself. But we say, shh, I got this. And then we try nicely to, well, let me tell you, and next thing you know, just like the disciples, it accelerates, and Pastor, we need help. Why? What happened? I don't know what happened. I'll tell you what happened. Somewhere along the line, you became way too important to you. Yeah, but you don't know what they did. See? Gotcha. We're going to get into it right here, too, Mark 15. I hope you understand, I can be tough because I know how I am, so don't think I'm calling you out. Mark 15, Jesus was arrested here the night before, taken to the high priest. He was interrogated, beaten, verse number 1, Mark 15. I'm going quickly, so stay with me. And straightway in the morning, the chief priest held a consultation with the elders and scribes and the whole council, and bound Jesus, and carried him away, and delivered him to Pilate. And Pilate asked him, art thou the king of the Jews? And he answering said unto him, thou sayest it. And the chief priest accused him of many things, but he answered nothing. And Pilate asked him again, saying, answerest thou nothing? Look, behold how many things, plural, they witness against thee. But Jesus yet answered nothing. And I want you to see what Pilate does. Very important. He marveled. What that means is his jaw dropped, his eyes got big, his brain blew up. Okay, marveling. What? You're accused of these guys, and you're going to sit there and say nothing. You're accused of a lot of things, and you're going to say nothing. You're accused of things that could lead to your death, and you're going to sit there and say nothing? What? I'm a governor. I've been watching for my whole career. People come and accuse other people. I've seen court cases. I've watched how these things work out, and nobody sits there and is accused and says nothing. Nobody sits there and just listens to these accusations, especially when you know you could die. Nobody does that. Exactly. I'm not like everyone else. The mind of Christ is so drastically different than the mind of man. The way he thinks, the perspective he has is so different from ours. And for Jesus, the will of God always took precedent over the way of man. Here Jesus is at the end of his mission. He knows he has but a few hours to go before he would hang on the cross to save the world from their sins. He had to get there. He didn't need to take time defending himself to the chief priest. He knew he had to get there. That's what was important. You see, hours ago, he kneeled before God in the Garden of Gethsemane, sweating in agony, praying in agony. In the flesh, he didn't want to die. In the flesh, he didn't want to go to the cross. In the flesh, he didn't want to be beaten. And he said 3 times, nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. We say that when we're feeling, spiritual. But we never mean that. In the flesh, we never mean that. because it's so hard to let the will of God come into our lives when we know it will deny the way of man. You say, what's the way of man? Defending ourselves. I love it because I'll have counseling sessions or mediation sessions, and by and large, folks are really great. They're very respectful. They allow me to try to mediate, and I'll often tell people this. I'll say, please understand right out of the gate, you don't need to defend yourself. This is a chance just to hear the other person speak. We're going to listen to their perspective. We're going to listen to what they have to say. It may hurt, but this isn't a chance to argue. This isn't a chance to prove yourself right or wrong. We're just going to listen. You don't have to defend yourself. Do you know how impossible that is for people to follow? We'll sit down and someone will say, well, you did this. And right away, well, let's talk about that because I didn't really do that and I didn't mean that. And I have to remind them, whoa. You don't have to do that. Let's just listen. Okay. And they listen. But 20 minutes later, can we go back to that? I want to explain. I'm not defending myself. I just want to explain myself. No, you're defending yourself. And I'm not saying it's not worth doing. I'm not saying it's even valuable to the conversation. But the point is, it's so hard for human nature, for the mind of man, the soul of man to say, all right, I can take it. Whatever you have to say, I'll just take it. You might take it for a few moments. But maybe a few weeks later you say, what about that? I've thought about that, and that's just not, you're not seeing it the right way, and you have this bulleted list of things why you were right and they were wrong. That's human nature. Jesus, no. He was minded to do the will of God. The way of man in the flesh was something he put aside. It was the will of God, no matter what, at any cost. You say, well, how did this fulfill the will of God? I want you to think about it. I'm speaking quickly to get done with this, but think about it. Are you telling me that Jesus Christ, the Son of God, couldn't have defended himself so brilliantly that Pilate would have said, you're not innocent. You are released. And he could have avoided death? Are you in any way thinking that Jesus couldn't have convinced the whole world that he was Jesus, the Son of God, not worthy of death? Oh, I believe he could have done whatever he wanted. Right. Didn't he hours ago just say, I'm he, and soldiers fell to their back? I mean, if I'm Jesus in that moment, and Pilate says, are you the king of the Jews? No, I'm actually king of the world. We want to see? Hey, 7 million angels, can you come here real quick? Boop. What's Pilate going to do? I'm actually the king of everything. You want me to tell you anything about what's going on in your head right now? Just read off the thoughts that he's having, the dream you had last night, the thoughts you're thinking about having, the woman you're sleeping with, the people you're cheating on. You want me to tell you everything? You tell me that Jesus couldn't have convinced Pilate and the chief priests and the whole multitudes that he was God, not worthy of death? You ever wonder why he was to be silent? It was to make sure he got to the cross. We overlook this part. Look at the prophecy of Isaiah. Not now. The prophecy of Isaiah was he would be smitten for us, right? And then the prophet said he will go to his slaughter, to his death as a sheep to the slaughter. The words are he will be a dumb, can't speak, lamb. That's prophecy. You know why? Because when Jesus speaks, the world is created. Jesus, you need to shut your mouth so that you can die for the sins of mankind. You ever been falsely accused? You ever just sit there and say, I don't need to answer for myself. I'm good. No. The flesh is just like, skin is peeling off because you want to tell the whole world, everybody, why you're not the person that you were accused of being. The mind of man is so drastically different than the mind of Christ. Sometimes it's God's will that we say nothing. Sometimes it's God's will that we be quiet. Sometimes it's God's will that we take one on the cheek. Sometimes it's God's will that we don't respond, that we allow for injustice, that we allow for false accusations. Do we have the mind of Christ in those moments? I will say this, it's always God's will that we swallow our pride. It's always God's will that we love our enemies. It's always God's will that we humble ourselves. It's always God's will that we forgive our offenders. It's always God's will that we turn the other cheek. Are those things not so difficult for us to do, so difficult for us to implement? Yes, they're the hardest thing for us to do as long as we are minded with the mind of man. But if we allow the Spirit to change our thought process, if we allow the spiritual to change the cerebral, we can do those things with relative ease, and in so doing, do the will of God and bring Him glory. I finish with a passage in the Old Testament when God makes the statement that perhaps is most obvious but so often forgotten. He said, "My thoughts are not your thoughts. Neither are my ways your ways." We're so different, you and I, God and man. That's how drastic of a transformation should take place in our lives when we give the Spirit of God the attention and the space that He desires. We have the mind of Christ. Our mentality has everything to do with our spirituality. Let's stand and have a word of prayer.